What's going on, everybody? Welcome once again to another episode of Still Processing, a 76ers podcast. Here for a special super secret episode outside of our normal streaming time because we have a special guest today. That would be the People's Insider, the dark horse candidate himself, NBA insider for Bleacher Report, contributor for the Steinline, Mr. Jake Fischer. Jake, how you doing, man?
What's going on, guys? I'm doing well with an introduction like that. How are you?
We're great. We're happy to talk with you for a bit. Learn a bit about what you've been up to lately. Obviously, this has been a dramatic offseason in the NBA, not just for players changing teams. We've seen things like Paul George obviously coming to Philadelphia from LA, but obviously on the media side, it was a drastic offseason with some big names, Adrian Wojnarowski, Chris Haynes, yourself, all kind of, changing hands as well. So, we're really interested in hearing a bit about that kind of backstory a little bit here. So I guess kind of to get into it, the best way to talk about it is just with, I would guess, your backstory with Mark, because we know you're working with the Steinline, and you did have a nice piece. I recommend, if anyone is not already subscribed to the Steinline on Substack, by the way, which we will include the link to that Substack, I highly recommend it. I've been subscribed for a number of years. And when I found out that Jake was going to be there, my dollar's going a lot further. I'll tell you that right now. So
there you go.
Definitely be sure to subscribe, check out Jake's work. But Jake, you had a great piece in there that kind of explained in great depth, what led to this. But, for our listeners, if you could kind of maybe go into the backstory of either you and Mark and why you joined the Steinline.
Yeah, a couple of years ago when I got started really in the transaction side of reporting at Bleacher Report, that's when Stein and I really kind of connected on a deeper friendship level. And I met him years ago when I was in town, just visiting friends for a Eagles Cowboys weekend in Dallas, and just walked over to Mavs practice and for Sports Illustrated at the time where I got my career started, and met him there, and he just kind of like took me under his wing for a little while, and we've traded sob stories and just complaints about things that are hard about the job, and started to talk about one day what it might look like if we were to ever work together, and the benefits of not working for anyone but ourselves, kind of thing. He was already doing it and leading the way. So when my situation with Yahoo came up this past August and was canvassing the marketplace, we seemed like I really thought there was no better time to do this and to bet on ourselves, especially because of the big retirement that you mentioned. With Adrian Wojnarowski heading out of the game, there's, I think, a big void to fill, and we want to fill it on the Steinline on Substack. And for those who haven't subscribed, and you said you're going to post the link, but the link is markstein.substack.com. So I've got that, and I'm doing video insider notebook stuff just like this from my desk with this background, with a fancier light and better, and the lighting's better during the day. But I do that in the Bleacher Report app once a week for now as well too.
So with this, the story that I mentioned that kind of goes into that great depth. I wanted to ask you this specifically because once I read this in that story, obviously there's a lot of great stuff that was pertinent to your career news that stood out. One bit that the story just sounds ridiculous in the best way that I just had to know more about, and I think our listeners are going to want to hear a little bit about. You mentioned that you flew to Maui to smoke with Don Nelson. Can we just talk about that for a brief second? That's just kind of a kind of a left field, but great in a great way kind of story.
Yeah, I think anyone who's like followed my career a bit has a little glimmer of some cannabis related tweets I've put out over the years. And after my first book, Built to Lose, published, I was trying to work on a second NBA nonfiction book, and pretty much all the feedback from publishers that my agent gave me was, your story needs to touch on the greater American story in addition to sports. So, I thought there was a real fascinating story between the relationship between drugs in America and the NBA. if you go through, Len Bias passing away in the 80s literally led to the Len Bias law that played a huge factor in incarcerating a lot of people for worse. And you bring it forward to today where the league is no longer testing for cannabis products and players like Kevin Durant get to be brand ambassadors and stuff like that. So, somewhere in between there at the time of my interview with him, which I did do an interview in the middle of that session on his beachfront property in Maui, we talked a lot. He was the winningest coach in NBA history. And we talked a lot about how he came to marijuana later in life. And a lot of it happened during his time in the Bay Area with the We Believe Warriors with, Matt Barnes and Steven Jackson and those guys. So, yeah, it was really cool. I mean, not only I never smoked with an 80-year-old guy before, so that was something too.
Yeah, that sounds like a once in a lifetime experience. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And again, in the best way. Now, circling back to the Steinline, we've already mentioned it. One thing that perhaps some people aren't used to when it comes to getting their journalism from their selected source. There is a cost associated with the Steinline, with subscribing to the Steinline. I maintain, and I think that you would agree, that there is an importance to supporting journalism in a general sense, obviously, but in these particular cases, people they love to throw out the term paywall and they immediately kind of back away from it. But there's an importance to supporting not just true and accurate journalism, but the journalists who maintain an obligation to tell that story correctly. Can you just kind of speak to the importance of supporting journalism, especially in this day and age where on the one hand it's great that everybody has the opportunity to have a voice, but on the other hand there's this oversaturation of information that can be incorrect or misleading. Can you kind of just speak to the importance of supporting proper high quality journalism?
Yeah, I think especially in today's world where everything gets aggregated left and right. And to be clear, we're talking about sports writing, and I don't cover the White House or,
Yes, exactly.
tensions on the border. But I think, there are people's lives at stake when it comes to players and their families and executives and all that stuff being said. And if you just want to follow an aggregation account that's going to cut a paragraph from my story and blast it without context, I see so many people on Twitter saying I wrote something years ago that I never did. It's just three pieces of one sentence I said got cobbled together and turned into something else. And, if you really want to find what the person is actually working on, I think there's number one, the importance of clicking on the link. That in itself has hurt a lot of industries and that aren't paywalled, places. When I was at Yahoo, a lot of people wouldn't click the link if they saw, the news aggregated on Twitter or Instagram or whatever. And that stuff, the lack of traffic, the lack of advertising revenue that holds off ends up lowering profits for those companies. And then it ends up, resulting in layoffs and stuff like that. So that's part of the interest to me in Substack and why there's, 4 million users on Substack right now, where, you get to actually have a direct relationship with the journalists and the writers who are bringing you the information and the full context and the full story that you actually can benefit from learning for. Journalism is a craft that is for the people. That's something I've always believed in. I think a lot of people in our industry get caught up in writing for other, the media cognoscenti, and I'm write this great story that's going to be shared a lot by my reporter, writer friends. But no, the goal is to inform the public. So if you think about it that way, it's just like going to a concert, right? You want to pay to go see your favorite performer, your favorite artist live. And this is a lot less than that. The full subscription is $50 a year. Right now we've got some holiday sales going on that are pretty low before the December 15th period comes up. But if you want to be able to have a full nuanced understanding of the NBA trade market, the only way to do that for our work is to pay $2 a month to be able to get full access to reading everything. And also, you're going to have access to chatting with us. We're going to do that once a week. If you comment on our articles, I'm replying to every comment on our articles, that especially the paid ones. I don't really respond to Twitter comments, but like if you're part of our community and you're helping us build and making it worth our while to put out this stuff for you guys, I'm more than happy to engage and show that love right back. So yeah, there's real benefits to just supporting your people in general that are doing the work that you want to read. But also you get, I think in what we're doing in our model, you're going to get rewarded for that too.
Yeah, that focus on community that you mentioned multiple times, I think that's one of the biggest highlights. That's something that Philly Sports Network has always valued highly, and um, it's I feel like different sites sometimes go about it different ways, but any site that truly focuses on that importance of community clearly has a proper understanding of, I think, how to do this right, if that makes sense. This is not, it's often treated as an us and them kind of a situation, whereas I think it needs to be a little more fluid. I think, you've been called, a man of the people. I think that's the kind of attitude that more people effectively need to have in this line of business to not only reflect accurate reporting, but I mean, I'll be honest with you, the way that I've approached this job, since I've got it, and especially as I've progressed into full-time beat reporting, uh, there's an aspect of fun to this, like not everything's great, not everything with this job is sunshine and roses, as you alluded to earlier, but there's an aspect of I think realism, positive realism for a change, which I think we as journalists need to have in our particular sect of journalism that uh, is increased for both us and our readers by having that sense of community. But so I once again, I can't say it enough. Be sure to go and subscribe to the Substack. You're not going to regret it. Like I said, I've been subscribed for years, and now with Jake there, I mean, there's just even more so of a reason for me to stick around. So definitely be sure to check it out.
Thank
But
you.
absolutely, absolutely, we do have to take some time talk a little bit of Sixers. And Jake,
This is
obviously,
a podcast.
it's a Sixers podcast. It's probably helpful if we talk about them at least for a couple minutes. I know no one really wants to talk about a 4-14 team, but it's kind of our job. So here we are. So we really kind of want to go over a plethora of different things. But Justin, what do you have first on the dock here?
So, Jake, from your standpoint, and of course, we all know the season hasn't started off. I guess I would say for a lot of people, it's probably one of the most anticipated seasons with all the moves they made in the offseason. But of course, they're 4-14 injuries and stuff. But what's your impression, or what's the early impression on the season for you, or yourself, or other insiders, thinking that the team's hitting the panic button, stuff like that? Just kind of want to get your thoughts on that.
I mean, look, it's obviously been a nightmare start with the meeting details getting leaked out to the injury stuff with Paul and Joel and Tyrese missing time, and even Caleb Martin, having his own shoulder thing. But I think the reality is at 4-14, the fact they're still only 5 games out of the 6th seed right now, and Joel Embiid only played a handful of games. There's absolutely no sign of panic. I think this front office under Daryl Morey is very data driven, right? And they always care about the maximum outcome, the highest end outcome possible. And that's going to be the case, I think, until this thing gets literally statistically unlikely for them to make the playoffs. And that's just not what it is right now. It's been a nightmare start, but they're lucky they're in the Eastern Conference where you could make up this gap in just a matter of a couple of weeks.
You've referred to in your writing, and this is, I think, partly specific to trade-related conversations, and I think that we also need to evaluate the Sixers separately a little bit, just because being under Daryl Morey, we've seen historically how Morey operates, and there tends to be a bit of a delay for maximum trade value. But you've mentioned a 20-game sample size right before, not even necessarily hitting the panic button, but just as an evaluation period to kind of get a scope of what you're dealing with as a franchise. Philadelphia is nearly through that 20-game sample size. Joel Embiid is still not consistently back in the lineup. Where do you feel through roughly 20 games this team is, and when do you expect them to, and I know there's so many variables, to potentially have a better idea of when they will be making a decision on this season?
Yeah. I mean, I think the 20 game sample size doesn't apply right now because you have, I think Joel Embiid, Paul George, and Tyrese Maxey played 6 minutes together. So, and like if Embiid were to come back tomorrow, Andre Drummond's out. So like, how does that really help you evaluate the backup center rotation or what have you? So I think until they have a much stronger window of health and like guys actually on the floor, they're going to keep kicking the can down the road in terms of like what to evaluate and how to evaluate it. However, like if the market starts to move quickly and like a player that's on their list, or I'm sure they've got, teams will pretty traditionally have their like, okay, these are our spots of weakness and these are our spots of strength on the roster in terms of position and whatnot. And they'll know like we're evaluating our, the Indiana Pacers for years had no power forwards, and now they have like arguably too many. So like that's a position of swing on their roster. The Sixers know they don't have a lot of depth at power forward. They've been at full strength. They'd be starting some combination of Kelly Oubre and Caleb Martin, who's guarding the forward between those two, and Paul George. And Yabusele's been a massive success story. But like the sample size of seeing him at the forward next to Joel, like can he guard 4 men in the NBA, especially where a lot of teams are playing smaller lineups? Like that's something I think those are all scenarios you just can't evaluate until your guy's back on the court. So the standard like 20 game sample size, all that type of stuff, they haven't had 20 games yet to look at this. Sure, that's like the counting numbers, but yeah, I think they're still going to wait, and they still have till February 6th. It's 2 full months. We're recording this on December 3rd. They've got plenty of time to really sit back and evaluate this thing, even though the trade season kind of unofficially starts in 2 weeks.
Yeah, a lot of people love to talk about December 5th, December 15th, January 15th. But for Daryl, it so often comes a little bit closer to that deadline. And especially for Philadelphia, where one of their expected, or I would say most likely to be moved players, KJ Martin, can't be dealt until January 15th.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like Sixers fans should get accustomed to this team for a while longer.
I'd agree.
So one player who we can evaluate right now, that's got to be Sixers rookie Jared McCain. Jake, just what have you seen from the rookie so far? He was obviously named just shortly before this recording. He was named the Eastern Conference Rookie of the Month for November. What have you seen out of the rookie guard?
Everyone knew he was going to be a high-level shooter, and his shooting his movement shooting was something that was projected to be like pretty elite. The fact that he's like able to get in the paint and do what he wants in mid-range and get to the rim and finish and all that type of stuff has just been an added level that I don't think many people fully expected from him, and why he fell to 15th and wasn't a top 10 pick. Now there are plenty. I was just talking to a team today, a Western Conference team, that told me they had him in their workout and they walked away saying like, this guy's a top 10 pick. So he had that type of grade from other teams. It's just not how the board fell. But he's not the biggest, strongest, most elite athlete out there. So the fact that he is getting to where he wants on the floor, getting to his spots, finishing over length, finishing through contact, can create off the dribble, can move without the ball, and find seams. It's just all been very, very impressive.
What do you think? Obviously, people love to talk player comparisons, and it's so rare that players can be broken down into kind of one-on-one comparisons like that. Just real quick, I just want to get your thoughts on the Jalen Brunson comparisons, because he's brought that up for himself. I think everyone loves to talk Steph because they look at the relocation ability, but what do you think about that kind of, especially working in the mid game, that Jalen Brunson comparison?
Yeah, McCain does that similar thing. He'll get his defender on his hip and kind of use that to create space and stuff like that. I see him as far more of a guy who he seems far more dangerous off the ball, and Jalen seems far more dangerous on the ball. Like, I think that's just part of their, it's just in the way. Like, I played with Jalen Brunson at a Sixers camp in 2002. Like, he's always been tiny, and he has this elite footwork, and he knows how to, pound the ball and get a defender going, the wrong, his weight off balance one way, and it would snap a crossover and go the other. McCain's got a handle, but he's not the same type of like break you down, just jitterbug with the ball like that. I do see similarities though. Like I do see the back down game, like I talked about, and how to use your body to create space because you are not necessarily the biggest, strongest, fastest guy out there. But yeah, I see him as more of like an off-ball combo guard, and Jalen's more of like an ISO heavy type of guy.
Yep, I agree with that. And real quick, Jake, I just wanted to switch real quick. I know we briefly talked about trade stuff and January 15th coming up and the deadline. And we all know that, it's been talked about or rumored about like players like KJ Martin being trade pieces. So I know the Sixers could be looking for maybe like a salary controlled young player that maybe they can bring in with Maxey. Is that something you think they'll actually do? And are there any real fits out there that you could see that could maybe be a possibility?
I think it all depends on the price, right? Like for a trade to get completed, you have to agree on the players, you have to make the math work, and then you have to agree on the assets. So those are the 3 steps. And sometimes that can be really hard, especially when you're factoring in this type of player. Talking about Justin's probably someone who's making $8 million is going to be making around 30 a year later. So like that's just in its own right a little bit difficult to price asset wise. But to answer your question, like Jonathan Kuminga is someone that I haven't heard Philadelphia is like looking at right now, but that's the type of player that fits that model. And again, I haven't heard this guy's name, but he was extension eligible. He didn't sign. Santi Aldama in Memphis, like he could be someone who fits into that salary slot that is up for a deal next year that Philly could potentially do. But again, I haven't heard either of those guys as people to like look out for. So I'm just spitting out examples that like are the position of need and do work math wise.
Yep.
I know you're saying you haven't heard it. I'm a big Santi guy, so that just that speaks to me. I think it's a great potential fit. So if they were to make him available, and if Philadelphia were to be interested, I think that could be an interesting fit. But Jake, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us, and obviously go over your work, go over the Sixers briefly. Again, everyone, you can check out Jake's work both at Bleacher Report and on the Stein Line. Be sure to check out his work. Subscribe to the Stein Line. Again, that link will be posted below in this video, and also go out and buy Built to Lose.
Read the book.
We've gone over that book. We've had Jake on I think this pod before, but also previous iterations of this pod, the Baseline Scoop. And we spoke about the book, and it's one of the best NBA books out there, bar none. So be sure to check it out.
Very kind. I appreciate this.
Absolutely. Our pleasure. Jake, have a great night. Okay.
And good
luck as NBA trade season's coming along.
Sounds good. Take care, guys.
Thank you, Jake. All right. Thank you again, everyone, for watching and tuning in today. This has been another episode of the Baseline Scoop. Not the Baseline Scoop. Wow. See, I'm talking about old times.
Still
I'm getting lost in old times now that I'm bringing them up. Jake joined, I think, about 3 years ago. Might be even longer. I think before either of us were even working the beat as a guest back when it was the Baseline Scoop. And he's been a good friend of the pod since. He's been helpful, personally, professionally, just an all-around great guy, so be sure to check out his work. Honestly, earnestly, there's few people, who you should be looking to follow ahead of him. So again, thank you all for listening. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share this episode of the pod. And again, for now, this has been another episode of Still Processing, a 76ers podcast.